In this lesson, you'll learn about the Linux directory structure, where you can find different components of the Linux operating system, and you'll see how applications can use the same conventions as the Linux operating system for their directory structure as well. So, why should you even care about the Linux directory structure? Well, having a solid understanding of the directory structure will increase your overall knowledge of Linux, help you navigate the file system, save you time because you know where system components and files are most likely to be, and helps you in troubleshooting issues because you'll be able to find log files and configuration files. Typically, applications use the same standards for their directory structure, so by learning the Linux file system layout, you'll be able to use and administer applications more effectively. Overall, your experience of using a Linux system will be improved by understanding the key ways Linux organizes its files and directories. First, I would like to share with you some of the most common top-level directories that you'll see when using the Linux operating system. There are several top-level directories to be aware of, but these first few are the most important and they're the ones you'll interact with the most often. The Linux directory structure is like a tree. The base of the Linux file system hierarchy begins at the root. Directories will start to branch off the root, but everything starts at root. The directory separator in Linux is symbolized by a / and is often abbreviated to just slash. So root is often referred to as slash, as there are no other directories above it. If you hear someone say, well, look in slash or that file is in slash, they are referring to the root directory. Bin or /bin or /bin is where you will find binary files or executable programs. Programs are written in source code, which is human-readable text. Those text files are then compiled into machine-readable binaries. They are called binaries because machine code is a string of zeros and ones. Keep in mind that applications that you can run are sometimes located in /bin. /etc or etc is where you'll find configuration files. Configuration files control how the operating system or applications behave. For example, there's a configuration file in /etc that tells the operating system whether to boot into text mode or graphical mode. /home is where user home directories are stored. So for example, my home directory would be /home/JSON. Linux systems can and often do have multiple users or multiple user accounts, and the home directory is where you can separate your data from another account's data. You can store anything you want in your home directory, like documents, music files, or vacation pictures. Opt is where optional or third-party software is stored. Opt is for software that is not bundled with the operating system. For example, Google Earth is not part of the standard Linux operating system, so that application would typically be installed in /opt. /tmp is called temp, and it's for temporary space. Most Linux distributions clear /temp at boot time, so if you put files in temp and the Linux server or your Linux desktop gets rebooted, the files you stored in temp will be gone. Temp is a great place to store temporary files, but don't put anything in temp that you want to keep long term. /usr is called the user directory, and it's where user-related programs live. Each one of these directories can have subdirectories. For example, we already talked about /home/username. The user directory is no different, and there will be a subdirectory structure within /user. For example, you'll find binary programs and executables located in /usr/bin. /var, also called var, is for variable data. Think of things that change often. Things that change often on a Linux system are typically log files that are generated either by the operating system itself or applications. In Linux, we typically talk about directories, but other operating systems may call the similar concept folders. If you think about it in terms of folders, then / or root is the main folder, and each one of these are subfolders. Again, folder and directory is often used interchangeably, but in Linux we're going to use the term directory. Here's a graphic that illustrates that each one of the directories hangs off of / or starts at the root. This graphic simply illustrates that each directory can have its own set of subdirectories. Here's yet another way to visualize this, and in this example, we can see that home.json has 3 directories: documents, downloads, and music. Up until this point, we've only talked about a few top-level directories. However, when you actually get on a live Linux system, you're going to see that there are several other top-level directories. I want to expose you to these other top-level directories so that you're slightly familiar with them when you see them. Probably the most interesting directory on your screen that we haven't talked about yet is /boot. Files that are needed to start or boot the operating system live in /boot. This is where you'll find the Linux kernel, for example. Here are even more top-level directories. I want to point out one on this screen. In some Linux distributions, the directory /media is used as a location to access the files stored on CD-ROMs, DVDs, or USB drives that are inserted into the computer. The contents of these devices are mounted at this location, allowing you to interact with them as if they were local files. Here are even more top-level directories that you might find on a Linux system. Earlier, we talked about home directories residing in /home. This is true for normal user accounts, but there is an exception for the root account. Root's home directory is /root. Root is a special administrative account, and we'll be talking more about that account elsewhere in this course. Just know that Root's home directory is not /home/root, but is instead /root. Some Linux distributions use /srv as a location to store data served by the Linux server. For instance, web files could be in /srv, /www, and if it's an FTP server, then the files might be located in /srv/ftp. As I mentioned earlier, the user directory will have a directory structure of its own. Here are some common things you'll find there. For example, user bin for binaries, user lib for libraries, and user local for software that's not installed as part of the base operating system. Let's switch gears a little bit and start talking about application directory structures. You'll find that some applications that are not bundled with a Linux operating system or distribution are installed in user local, and often they're installed in user local program name, and from there they'll have their own subdirectory structure. In this example, CrashPlan is backup software that's not bundled with a Linux distro. If you were to install it from their website, it would install into user local CrashPlan. If you wanted to find the binary for this program, you would look in user local CrashPlan bin. If you wanted to configure how the program behaves at runtime, you would modify configuration files that are located in /user/local/CrashPlan/etc. And if you wanted to see the log files that this program is generating, again, you would look in user local CrashPlan under the log subdirectory. By the way, that's where this software gets installed at the time of this recording, but of course that could change, and I have no control over the CrashPlan application. Just be aware if you try to install it yourself, it may install in a different location, but this is just one example of how many applications get installed on a Linux system. I mentioned earlier that applications can get installed in /opt or /opt. AVG is an antivirus software that is not bundled with a Linux distribution. This particular application installs itself into /opt/AVG. So you'll see this common pattern a lot. An application will install to /opt/application name, and then have a subdirectory structure of its own with its actual binary located in /bin. Here is a slight variation you'll sometimes see applications follow. Let's take this fictitious application called MyApp, for example. Even though the main MyApp program gets installed in opt_myApp, where perhaps the binaries and libraries live, you'll also see that it installed files in etc opt_myApp. That is where you would find the configuration files for this particular application. The log files in this example would be stored in var opt_myApp. Sometimes when applications are installed, they are not given their own directory structure. Instead, they are installed in a shared manner. For example, an application MyApp could get installed in user local. The binary would be located at user local bin MyApp, and the configuration for this file would be at user local etc myapp.conf. Note that the user local bin directory would not only contain MyApp, but also other applications that were installed in this shared manner. Another common practice is to use the directory /opt/company name or /opt/organization name to install software written by a specific company or organization. For example, if you work for the Acme Corporation, you might see programs installed in the opt acme bin directory. This helps maintain a clear separation between software developed in-house and software from external sources. Another slight variation on the theme of application directory structures is to use /opt followed by /company name and finally /product name. A real-life example is Google, so when you install Google's Chrome browser on Linux, it installs into opt Google Chrome, and Google Earth installs into opt Google Earth. Here's yet another slight variation, and I promise we're almost done with this. Opt organization name or opt company name, or even user local organization name or company name. The most important thing to know about applications that are not shipped with the Linux operating system or by default in a Linux distribution is that they're typically found in /opt or in /user/local. In summary, the most common top-level directories that you'll interact with on a Linux system are /, also called root, bin or /bin or /bin, then /etc, /home, /opt, /temp, /user, and /var. Also, applications that are not shipped with the Linux operating system are typically installed in either user local or in opt.